Well, good Thursday evening. Meteorologist Evan Stewart here. Welcome to Hurricane Hub Live. It is the 30th of October. Where has this year gone? I tell you what, it's been going by fast, and we only have about a month and a day left in the Atlantic hurricane season. And of course, the big story on Hurricane Hub Live tonight is talking about Hurricane Melissa. It's still out there, no longer the Category 5 storm that it was earlier. It is now down to a Category 2 storm. I'll have the latest track as it heads towards Bermuda. Also take a look at the extended forecast, see if there's any other potential development. And coming up a little later on, we'll have some of the stories coming in from the islands, especially Jamaica and Cuba, some of the damage there on the islands there through the Caribbean. So let's talk about this hurricane season so far. Again, the peak is September 10th. Here is where we are, October 30th. And notice we still can see some activity in the month of November, but typically that activity isn't strong. Of course, Melissa being sort of the exception to the rule here in late October. But we see far less activity here for the last month of hurricane season. You can see it's sort of similar to what we see in the first month of hurricane season, but we can still see some activity. And of course, that's something we'll continue to monitor as we go through the month of November. But the Atlantic hurricane season, again, started with Andrea. We've only had one system, that was Tropical Storm Chantal, make landfall in the United States. We had a second landfall here with Barry, and of course Melissa is the third landfalling hurricane really this year. And we had quite a few make it up to major hurricane strength. As a matter of fact, we had Aaron, that was our first hurricane, rapidly intensified, became a major hurricane, Category 5 strength. Gabrielle, our second hurricane of the year, became a Category 4, followed by Umberto, a Category 5, Imelda, Cat 2, and Melissa, a Cat 5. So of our 5 hurricanes, 4 of them became major hurricanes and 3 Category 5. There's still names on the list: Nestor, Olga, Pablo, Rebecca, Sebastian, Tanya, Van, and Wendy. And we'll see if there's anything going on out there elsewhere in the Atlantic. But let's get to the latest on Melissa. Spinning here well off the southeast coastline, doesn't even look as much like a tropical system anymore. It's starting to take on some extratropical characteristics, sort of starting to look a little more like a comma. It's actually being impacted by the cold front that moved through the eastern half of the country earlier this morning, and that's helping to usher the storm quickly off towards the north and east. You can see here are the Bahamas. Here's the island of Bermuda, which has had several close calls this year. And again, hurricane warnings are up for the island because there's the potential that some hurricane force gusts will be there with Melissa as it passes by off towards the west. But as of the 8 o'clock advisory, just in from the National Hurricane Center, still a Cat 2 hurricane with winds of 105 miles per hour, moving quickly northeast at 32 miles per hour. You might remember just a few days ago, before it made landfall in Jamaica, it was only moving at around 2 or 3 miles per hour. So it is rapidly accelerating here off towards the north and east. Notice as we head here, Friday into Saturday, might just skirt by and impact areas around St. John's, Newfoundland. And then eventually, by the weekend and early next week, moving up towards Iceland and up towards Europe. So again, moving well off into the North Atlantic very, very quickly. So that's the good news, certainly, for a quick moving storm. So let's get a little bit of a closer look here with Futurecast. Some of the wind gusts, even already starting to see some of those gusts in Bermuda at St. George, coming in at around 36 miles per hour. As the storm passes by late this evening into the overnight, could be some gusts there, close to hurricane strength. And then the storm will quickly again accelerate off towards the north and east. And then notice it might brush areas here around Nova Scotia, Halifax. This is some of the residual winds, 32 miles per hour, but getting close to St. John's, could have some tropical storm force gusts there into areas of Newfoundland before what is now a transitioning system, or will be a transitioning system, moves off into the North Atlantic. What about elsewhere? So the Climate Prediction Center puts out a week 2 and a week 3 forecast. The National Hurricane Center will do the first week, and then the Climate Prediction Center does week 2 and week 3. So looking ahead towards November 5th through 11th, Any other tropical development expected? Well, there is some low chances that here in the Western Caribbean, one of the more favorable areas because the water temperatures are just so warm that we could see some development. Low odds, less than 20%. That's November 5th through 11th. And then as we go another week, November 12th through the 18th, you can see here low chances again in the Western Caribbean. The rest of the tropical Atlantic not calling for any chances for development. So that's certainly good news, and that's one of the reasons why we typically see the lesser activity here into the month of November. We start to get these fronts that are moving through. The upper level winds become less favorable for development. And even though the water temperatures are still warm, we could still see something spin up again through the Gulf or into the Caribbean or just off the southeast coastline. Looks like pretty low odds of that coming up over the coming days. Now, after this quick break, we'll talk more about some of the stories coming in from the islands. We're just getting more pictures coming in and more stories from the people who survived the storm. And then we'll have Hurricane Hub Live trivia. Again, that comes up right after this quick break. Welcome back to Hurricane Hub Live. The Cuban countryside was affected by Hurricane Melissa with damage to several crops. CNN international correspondent Patrick Opperman is in eastern Cuba with more details.
So we've just come across this scene as we're leaving Santiago de Cuba, and it goes on for a long, long way. All these banana plants that have been completely knocked down, destroyed. You can see the force Melissa's winds came through here with. And the issue for Cuba, even though this storm didn't hit as hard as Jamaica, is it's done a tremendous amount of damage, and Cuba doesn't produce enough food as is. So when you have a whole crop like this that's lost, that is going to have a big impact. Cuba can't afford to import food, and so, you know, it just is going to be less food that's available for people, food that they were counting on producing and is now lost.
Now, Patrick was also surveying the streets of Cuba today and walks us through what he says was still devastating, but not as catastrophic as what we saw in Jamaica.
You see streets blocked by debris like this one all over Santiago de Cuba. There are trees down, there's a lot of roof damage, flood damage. There's also the sense that it could have been much, much worse. Certainly compared to what their neighbors in Jamaica suffered, Cuba got off much, much luckier. People had feared the storm would come and hit here like it did in Jamaica as a devastating Category 5 hurricane. It came as a powerful storm that could do impressive structural damage, but not the absolutely catastrophic damage that we are seeing now in Jamaica. The main issue, of course, here is the power continues to be off. It's been off since before the hurricane. Already in places like Santiago de Cuba, the power system was so fragile, it was about off half the time on a regular day. The problem now is the longer the power is off, people's food begins to spoil, the tempers begin to flare. Over the summer, with some of the widespread power outages, we saw protests here in Santiago. That's something the Cuban government has very little tolerance for. They've asked people to be patient. Of course, though, the longer the hot days here go on and hot nights without power, patience begins to wear thin. Patrick Almancin, Santiago de Cuba.
Now we transition to Jamaica, and this is footage from on the ground after Hurricane Melissa did damage in St. Elizabeth Parish, Jamaica. Just a trail of devastation across the Caribbean following Hurricane Melissa. The storm was one of the most powerful Atlantic hurricanes in more than 150 years. Unfortunately, at least 30 people have died, and there's widespread destruction in Jamaica, Cuba, and the Bahamas. Thursday, the hurricane, as we know, is continuing towards Bermuda. And as many already in its path know, we're just starting to see the recovery process. Michael Yoshida reports.
Devastation across Jamaica. Homes destroyed and neighborhoods underwater. Infrastructure left failing after Hurricane Melissa slammed into the country as a powerful Category 5 storm. Whipping winds and unrelenting rain battered the country. The southern and western sides of the island feeling the full force of the hurricane.
The entire infrastructure and everything needed for the convenience of modern living is destroyed.
Caravans of vehicles seen as first responders and others tried to make their way through the aftermath. Officials saying it could take days or weeks to determine the full toll of Melissa.
The supermarkets, the bakery, everything has been washed away.
The Bahamas, Cuba, Dominican Republic, and Haiti also impacted by torrential flooding rain and powerful winds. Across the Caribbean, at least 30 people have died as rescue and recovery missions are underway. Emergency crews are also rushing to restore power and begin the cleanup.
The situation here is devastating. We need all the help that we can. And conditions are going to deteriorate as the day progresses.
Several international efforts have launched to aid in the recovery. The United Kingdom, China, and United States announced humanitarian funding and resources will be sent to those affected across the Caribbean.
So keep the positive outlook, keep hope alive, and we will get through this and we will rebuild better.
In Washington, Michael Yoshida.
Now, first responders from across Virginia are on their way to help Jamaica following the devastation left by Hurricane Melissa. The State Department has mobilized Virginia Task Force 1, which is sending a 34-person rapid assessment team along with 4 rescue dogs to help with search and recovery efforts on the island. Officials say at least 3 families remain trapped by floodwaters in the town of Black River, where crews were unable to reach them due to the dangerous conditions. Now, if you were watching Hurricane Hub Live yesterday, we told you about a Virginia Beach couple stranded at their resort in Jamaica. Sherry Watts Ankeny says that the Excellence Oyster Bay Resort in Montego Bay moved them to a storm shelter earlier this week and told them to leave their belongings in the room. These are some photos from that shelter. She adds that the resort filled restaurants with pool cushions, and that's where around 100 people stayed during the storm. Back at the resort, glass balconies were shattered, hotel room doors blown off, and furniture thrown around. Watts Ankeny describes the moment that they knew that they were in the eye of the storm.
The boards that covered the doors to the shelter were banging pretty hard. And the way that we knew that we were in the eye was that stopped. And then we started hearing that banging again. Even though we were really, really internal, I mean, we were away from any external windows.
Now, she says that their flight home was originally scheduled for tomorrow. They've been updated that their flight will likely be next Monday. Now, Hurricane Melissa, as we said, has killed at least 30 people in the Caribbean as the storm makes its way now towards Bermuda. The hurricane made landfall in Cuba on Tuesday after devastating Jamaica. Meanwhile, the storm has also left the Dominican Republic reeling after it killed at least 1 person. Jessica Hasbin reports from Santo Domingo.
I'm standing here in Capotillo, one of the most vulnerable areas of the Dominican capital, right on the banks of the Osama River. For the past week, entire families have been seeing their lives seriously affected by the heavy rains brought on by Hurricane Melissa, even though the storm itself is now far from Dominican territory. Authorities here confirm that around 40 people remain right here at that school right over there. And nationwide, more than 4,000 have been forced to leave their homes. The Center of Emergency Operations says that 24 provinces remain under alert, 4 of them at the highest level because of the threat of landslides and heavy flooding in those areas. Let's walk down over here where the families that live the closest to the river have been experiencing the worst of the storm, even though Hurricane Melissa is very far away from the Dominican Republic. Let's walk over here and take a look at what's going on with these families. They've been bringing back their stuff over to their little houses, and this is someone I've spoke to earlier. ¿Cómo es que usted se llama nuevamente?
Alejandro.
This is Alejandro. He's been living here for about 40 years, and every time it rains, he's got to run and take what he can and salvage what he can. According to the Center of Emergency Operations, at least 50 communities remain cut off due to flooding and landslides. And the banks here by the river, families and residents continue to live with the uncertainty of not knowing if the river will rise again in the coming hours. The forecast is clear. The rain will continue at least through Thursday, maybe Friday, leaving entire communities at the mercy of Mother Nature and hoping they won't have to abandon their homes once more. Reporting from Santo Domingo, Jessica Hasbun, CNN.
Time now to wrap things up. We want to get you to the Hurricane Hub Live Tropical Trivia. Tim asked this question last night. Only 4 Category 5 hurricanes have struck the United States. Which one was the most recent? Well, that was Hurricane Michael. Now, that's going to wrap things up here on Hurricane Hub Live. This is our next to the last episode for this hurricane season. Tomorrow night will be our final episode, as we typically see less activity at the end of the hurricane season during the month of November. Of course, if something were to develop, we'd have a special edition of Hurricane Hub Live. But be sure to join me again tomorrow night for Hurricane Hub Live, our final episode of the season at 8 p.m. For now, I'm 13 News Now meteorologist Evan Stewart.